Chapter 7. The Disclosure. If anything further was needed to convince Jesus that he could no longer delay to get ready for the tremendous test awaiting him, it was the news which reached him of the execution of John the Baptist. That burning and shining light had suddenly been extinguished, a sign as sure as his own calling at Jordan. He must therefore begin to take his chosen 12 disciples more fully into his confidence, identify himself plainly to them as the Messiah, which in their hearts some of them already believed him to be, and prepare their minds for what was in store for him. The Gospels are unable to provide us with any reliable scheme of the ministry so that we have events and teaching in their actual chronological order. The information at their disposal made this impossible. Early tradition had furnished an outline of major events and trends into which they had fit to the best of their ability the oral and written material available to them. But there are sufficient clues to enable us to follow developments in the policy and planning of Jesus and to detect what he was seeking progressively to achieve. Certain landmarks appear to guide our steps and apprise us of our position. One of these is the tradition that the disclosure by Jesus of the violent end he would meet at the hands of the authorities came after he was informed of the death of John the Baptist and was made in connection with the acknowledgement of his messiahship. From now on, it was determined that to comply with the conditions of his fate, he must increasingly reveal himself as the Messiah and abandon his incognito. We learned that Herod Antipas, tetrarch of Galilee and Pera, had been greatly affected by reports of the activities of Jesus. As we have pointed out previously, Herod at this time was faced with the prospect of war with the king of Arabia, whose daughter had been his wife and whom he had insulted by marrying Herodotus, formerly the wife of his half-brother Philip. He had imprisoned John in his Persian fortress at Machaerus, his present headquarters, for denouncing this union and because the Baptist might provoke a rebellion among his subjects when he needed his forces to meet the Arabian threat. According to the gospel account, Herodotus was determined that John should die and found an occasion to force her husband's hand to procure the execution of the prophet. Now Herod heard what dismay that other preacher was operating in Galilee and drawing large crowds, giving out the same message as John. It was as if the Baptist had risen from the dead to mock and defeat him. Here was a new menace, and for the first time, Jesus was in physical danger. An incident reported only by Luke appears to relate to these circumstances. The same day, we read, there came to Jesus certain of the Pharisees, saying unto him, Get thee out and depart hence, for Herod will kill thee. And Jesus said unto them, Go ye and tell that fox, Behold, I cast out demons, and I perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I shall be perfected. Nevertheless, I must walk today and tomorrow and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet perish out of Jerusalem. The passage is interesting because it shows a section of the Pharisees doing their utmost to save the life of Jesus. There were two schools of thought among them, the one following the precepts of the gentle Hillel, and the other the severe teaching of Shammai. The latter would have been far more offended by the conduct of Jesus and wished to see him discredited and even imprisoned if that was the only way to stop his activities. But there were plenty of milder Pharisees well disposed towards him who welcomed him into their homes. The reply of Jesus to the friendly warning was defiant. It was the first occasion he had spoken despairingly of a ruler, and he could commit his indiscretion because his mind was now set on his ordeal at Jerusalem, where, and nowhere else, he must fulfill his destiny. As Jesus viewed the situation, he was not in imminent peril, since Herod was too heavily engaged in to proceed against him at present. However, he did not completely disregard the risk he was running and prudently withdrew to the north of the Sea of Galilee into the territory which had belonged to Philip. It was in the region of Caesarea Philippi that Jesus asked his disciples what people were saying about him, whom they thought he was. They told him that opinions differed. Some supposed he was John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, or another of the old prophets returned to earth. Sorry, that just reminded me of Roadhouse, the movie. And what do you say? Boldly Simon spoke for them all. You are the Messiah, and so earned the nickname Peter, Rock. Jesus rejoiced that the truth had been revealed to them. It was a heartening confirmation of his status, but he ordered them to keep his identity secret. It was still too soon to make the fact generally known that the time would come when he went to Jerusalem for the last trials, which as Messiah he must undergo. The words Jesus used to convey his disciples to convey to his disciples what was in store for him are momentous. Dang it, the chair keeps moving. They may be said to initiate the second phase of his ministry. Never before had he spoken about his end, but the death of John the Baptist made it essential that he should now do so. We cannot be certain of the language, though the sense is doubtless here. We seem to be reading the introductory paragraph to the Passion section of the primitive testimony book, and something of the kind did perhaps preface the oracle setting out the Messiah's rejection, execution, and resurrection. The announcement, as it is first made in Mark's Gospel, reads, "And he began to teach them, and the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected of the elders and of the chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days risen again." Thereafter, with slight variations, it is repeated at intervals like a refrain. In these statements, Jesus is able already to specify who will act against him. The elders, chief priests, and scribes can only mean that Sanhedrin, the council for Jewish affairs at Jerusalem, while the Gentiles introduced on another occasion must be Romans represented by the procurator of Judea. Jesus could make such a deduction only by interpreting the scriptures in the manner of the Essenes. Following the commentaries of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we can create for ourselves an apostate pesher, oracular explanation of the opening of the second psalm. Why do the heathen rage and the people meditate a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. The explanation is that in the last times, the wicked will conspire against the Messiah of righteousness to destroy him, but in the end, their design will come to nothing, for the Lord will deliver him out of the hands of his enemies, the kings of the earth. These are the Kittim, synonymous for Romans in the scrolls, who rule over many nations. The rulers, these are the elders and priests of Jerusalem, who govern Israel through their evil counsel. What Jesus had done in his earlier years was to see the Messiah in the different stages of his manifestation as one of the great objects of prophecy. He had gathered to himself the sufferings and the faith in survival of the righteous, which had poured itself out in poem and prediction. He had applied to himself what was written by his ancestor David as an outlaw hunted by the king, but whom God had chosen to rule his people Israel, and what was written concerning the persecuted servant of God, as of those messengers whom kings and priests had mocked and condemned. All these scriptures and many others pointed towards and would find their expression in the experiences of the Messiah, all the tears, and ultimately the triumph. When the Nazarenes look back on the dramatic climax of the life of the Messiah, as many of us still do through the libretto to Handel's oratorio, they were overwhelmingly impressed by the oppositeness of so many passages to what had transpired. Having to establish both for themselves and for Jewish audiences that what had taken place was in accordance with the scriptures, they were able to build up a formidable array of testimonies. In their zeal, they even amplified and supplemented the account of his experiences, as certain texts appeared to require additional incidents which would fulfill them. Almost insensibly, teaching was converted into fact, and individuals could claim that they had heard such things from someone who had heard them from one of the apostles. Thus, the legend grew from the story to testimony to embellished story. We have to be fully conscious of this process of gilding the lily in studying the Gospels and the early patricistic literature. The feat of Jesus was far more extraordinary because he was looking forward into the unknown, seeking to determine the shape of things to come as a guide to his own actions. It was his achievement to have extracted from the oracle so clear a picture and to have been so assured of its reliability that he could follow it like a star which charted his course and commit himself to certain positive predictions of what would take place. The achievement was particularly remarkable because it transcended the relative vagueness of contemporary messianism and brought its ideas into a sharper and indeed a singular focus. There were strands of different colors held to mark the role of distinct messianic personalities, the prophet like Moses, suffering just one, the son of David, the apocalyptic son of man. Jesus wove them into one. No wonder what he disclosed to his untutored disciples with their popular notion of the Messiah only as the royal heir of David surprised and shocked them and brought an instantaneous protest from the outspoken Peter. How could Jesus utter such words of ill omen? But Jesus was not being in the least morbid. As a scribe instructed in the affairs of the kingdom of God, who had brought out new things as well as old, he was simply stating what to him was plain and incontrovertible. To get behind the statement of Jesus, we must ourselves make an excursion into testimony land. We must set out at least a section of those scriptures for many years had been the meat and drink of the soul of Jesus. Marshal them in order and savor them in their bitterness and in their sweetness. We are not pretending to reproduce with assurance the very passages which informed him of what would befall in his name of testing, but in the fashion of the Nazarene compilers of testimonies, we can demonstrate the effect of the conjunction of some of the things that were written. Opposition and rejection. The king of the earth sets themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was displeased, and we esteemed him not. The stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner. Mine enemies speak evil of me. When shall he die and his name perish? All that hate me whisper together against me do they devise my hurt. And one shall say unto him, What are these wounds in thine hands? Then shall he answer, Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered. The mouth of the wicked and the mouth of the deceitful are open against me. They have spoken against me with a lying tongue. They compassed me about the words of hatreds and fought against me without a cause. For my love, they are my adversaries. Ill treatment and execution. I gave my back to the smiters and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair. I hid not my face from shame and spitting. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. I am a worm and no man, a reproach to men and despised of the people. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip, they shake the head, saying, He trusted in the Lord, that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaveth to my jaws. Thou hast brought me into the dust of death. For dogs have compassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. Like a lion they are at my hands and my feet. I will tell all my bones, they look and stare upon me. They part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. Reproach hath broken my heart, and I am full of heaviness, and I looked for some to take pity, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. They gave me also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink. For they persecute him whom thou hast smitten, and they talk to the grief of those whom thou hast wounded. They shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him, as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him, as one that is in bitterness for his firstborn. Yikes! Salvation and resurrection. Though I walk in the midst of trouble, thou wilt revive me. Thou shalt stretch forth thine hand against the wrath of mine enemies, and thy right hand shall save me. The Lord will perfect that which concerneth me. The bands of the grave compassed me about. The snares of death prevented me. In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried unto my God. He heard my voice out of his temple, and my cry came before him, even into his ears. Then the earth shook and trembled, the foundation of the hills moved and were shaken. He sent from above, he took me, he drew me out of the great waters, he delivered me from my strong enemy. Come and let us return to the Lord, for he hath torn and he will heal us. He hath smitten and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us, and on the third day he will rise us up, and we shall live in his sight. I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand. I shall not be moved. Therefore my heart is glad, and my glory rejoiceth. My flesh also rests in hope. For thou wilt not leave any soul in the grave, neither wilt thou suffer thy Holy One to see corruption. Thou wilt show me the path of life. In the presence is fullness of joy. At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. God will redeem my soul from the grasp of the grave, for he shall receive me. The king shall joy in the strength, O Lord, and in thy salvation how greatly shall he rejoice. Thou settest a crown of pure gold on his head. He asked life of thee, and thou gavest it him. Even length of days forever and ever. His glory is great in thy salvation. Honor and majesty hast thou laid upon him. What we have done here is to string together in the ancient fashion some of the biblical texts regarded as affording messianic testimonies, and the impression they create is both moving and eloquent. We can appreciate the influence they exercised on the early Christians in molding and shaping the account of the Messiah's passion so that it was brought into conformity with the oracles. This is why we cannot accept as historical certain features of the narratives of the Passion as reported in the Gospels. The testimonies come between the reality and the later descriptions, but we are not entitled to jettison the whole story. There is much in it that rests on reliable tradition, and fortunately the Christian records furnish some evidence of which the authors did not realize the worth or importance. We therefore have to examine the Gospels closely for the elements of truth. But while we must hold that the Nazarenes, inspired by the Scriptures, historicized in retrospect matters which they found in them, the same sources could and did to an extent inform Jesus in prospect. Accepting that their oracular message concerned the last times and believing that many of the passages were thus to be applied to himself as the Messiah, he could, like the Essenes, bring their implications into relationship with contemporary conditions in Palestine and plan accordingly. We are to think in terms of his Jewish faith and ideas of the apocalyptic order, strange and even incredible as they may appear to us. Our alien concepts are useless as a standard by which to judge the workings of his mind. They can never give the real sense and feel of him, though it may satisfy us to fashion him in a likeness which we find more acceptable. With the help of the oracles, Jesus had deduced that he was required to suffer ignominiously at the hands of the rulers at Jerusalem. As self-confessed Messiah, this stood to reason also. Under Tiberius, no king of the Jews could exist who had not been approved by Caesar and confirmed by the royal Roman Senate, and it was the business of the authorities in Palestine Jewish and Roman, acting for Caesar to apprehend anyone claiming to be king. In the case of one who was not of the Roman nobility nor a Roman citizen, he could be condemned to death if found guilty. Death by crucifixion, the barbarous punishment the Romans meted out for highway robbery, mutiny, high treason, and rebellion. That Jesus was aware of this is shown by the words he used just after he had privately and under pledge of strict secrecy admitted that to the hold on pledge of strict secrecy admitted to the 12 that he was the Messiah. And when he had called the people unto him with his disciples also, he said unto them, whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the good news, the same shall save it. He could not yet state openly that he was the Messiah, but he could warn that anyone associating with him from now on should know what the penalty was likely to be. Yet if they suffered with the Messiah, they would also reign with him. The reactions of the disciples to the disclosure of the fate awaiting him and their behavior thereafter certified to Jesus that he could not take them fully into his confidence. They seem quickly to have dismissed his words as a mystery which they could not fathom, and perhaps thought that he had been made melancholy by the death of John the Baptist. They were more concerned with the material rewards expected when the kingdom of Jesus was established, and squabbled among themselves as to which of them should have the highest positions. Jesus had now to prepare for the most difficult and dangerous part of his present mission, which demanded the utmost caution and the most careful organization and timing. He could not look to his disciples to assist him directly in the arrangements for his coming ordeal. He could not even trust them not to work against him if he told them too much, and they might easily ruin everything which he had to contrive. They were devoted to him and loyal in their own way, but of limited intelligence, simple Galileans for the most part, who would not be at all at home in the sophisticated atmosphere of Jerusalem. What Jesus had need of now for the furtherance of his designs were dependable friends in Judea. We have allowed that the fourth gospel may possibly be right that Jesus at the outset of his ministry had gone up to Jerusalem for the spring festivals of Passover and Pentecost, but it would be quite inconsistent with his policy to have staged any premature demonstration there, like the cleaning of the temple, or indulged in debate of a character which could not fail to provoke summary action against him, which he would have richly deserved if he had spoken as the fourth gospel makes him speak. The Greek author of this gospel, as we have it, has effectively buried the Jesus of history and substituted his own theological notions of the Son of God, a posturing polemical figure with a streak of anti-Semitism wholly incomparable with the Messiah of apostolistic tradition. It is not to the credit of the church that it has taken this presentation of a pathological egoist to its bosom as the veritable Jesus. We have to dismiss it as accurate portraiture while recognizing that the author of it had access to some genuine unpublished reminiscences of the unnamed beloved disciple, which he has freely employed as it suited him to lend verisimilitude to his otherwise impossible creation. It is difficult to free the gold from the dross, but we catch a gleam here and there which makes us thankful for the book's preservation. Without the fourth gospel, we might never have heard of Nicodemus or of Lazarus of Bethany, and we would be quite unfamiliar with the part played by the beloved disciple himself. The synoptic tradition, which seems in this respect to be much more in keeping with the probabilities, requires us to believe that Jesus most carefully concealed his identity as the Messiah in the early part of his ministry and never at any time claimed to be other than human. If this were not the case, the ministry would have had an even shorter duration, and Jesus would not have been crucified as King of the Jews. We must never let theology entice us away from the historical circumstances so that we lose contact with the factors which Jesus had to take into account. He turns towards the south now because there were things to set in train there if the scriptures were to be fulfilled. He had to achieve mastery over the conditions that they might serve the ends of God and not of man.